The stars had never looked more beautiful to Captain Daniel Cooper as he stood on the bridge of the horizon. His ship led a small fleet of 5 human vessels through the vast darkness of space, heading toward their first official meeting with the Galactic Council. After decades of preparation, humanity was finally ready to join the greater community of spacefaring civilizations. The crew around him worked quietly at their stations, and Daniel could feel the excitement in the air. This was history in the making. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat at the tactical station monitoring the surrounding space. She was young but sharp, always 3 steps ahead of any potential problem. Next to her, Commander Richard Hayes reviewed the engineering reports, making sure every system was running perfectly. They could not afford any mistakes on this mission. Behind them, 2 colony ships carried 5,000 civilians, families who volunteered to establish the first human settlements in this region of space. 3 cargo vessels followed with supplies and trade goods. It was a peaceful mission, one meant to show the galaxy that humans came in friendship. The Galactic Council had sent welcoming messages when humanity first achieved faster-than-light travel. 12 different alien species made up the Council, each with their own cultures and histories. The humans had studied everything they could about these species. The Verath, a reptilian race with dark green scales and yellow eyes, controlled most of the military decisions in the Council. They were warriors by nature, proud of their strength and their long history of conquest. But the Council had rules now, laws that prevented open warfare between member species. Or so the humans believed. Daniel received clearance to dock at Epsilon 9, a massive space station that served as a neutral meeting point for different species. The station sparkled like a jewel against the black background of space, with ships from a dozen worlds coming and going. As the horizon approached, Daniel felt a moment of pure joy. His daughter was on one of the colony ships. She would grow up in a universe full of wonder and possibility, meeting alien friends and exploring new worlds. He had worked his entire career for this moment. The docking procedure went smoothly. Daniel, Sophie, and Richard prepared to meet with the Council representatives. They put on their dress uniforms, checked their translation devices, and reviewed the diplomatic protocols one more time. Everything had to be perfect. As they waited in the airlock, Daniel received a message from the station master. The meeting was delayed by 2 hours. Technical difficulties, the message said. Daniel was not worried. He told the colony ships to remain in formation while they waited. Sophie noticed it first. Her tactical display showed 3 Verath warships approaching from behind a nearby moon. She reported it to Daniel, but neither of them was alarmed. The Verath were part of the Council. Perhaps they were coming to escort the human fleet to the meeting. Daniel ordered all ships to maintain position and sent a friendly greeting to the Verath vessels. There was no response. Sophie's display suddenly lit up with warnings. The Verath ships were charging their weapons. Daniel had less than 10 seconds to react. He shouted orders across the command channel, telling all ships to scatter and activate defensive shields. But the colony ships were not military vessels. They had no shields, no weapons, only civilian families trying to start new lives. The Verath fired without warning, without mercy, without any declaration of hostility. Brilliant orange beams of energy cut through space and struck the first colony ship. The vessel exploded in a flash of white light that Daniel would see in his nightmares for the rest of his life. The second colony ship tried to run. It boosted its engines to maximum and turned away from the attack. The Verath pursued it like predators chasing wounded prey. 3 more shots hit the ship's engines and it broke apart in a series of smaller explosions. Daniel watched 2,000 people die in seconds. His daughter was on that ship. His hand shook as he gripped the command chair. Sophie was screaming into the communication system, demanding that the Verath stop. Richard was crying as he tried to get the Horizon's engines ready for emergency jump. The cargo vessels scattered in different directions. 2 of them made it to faster than light speed and escaped. The third was not fast enough. The Verath destroyed it with casual efficiency, as if they were at target practice. Then the Verath turned their attention to the horizon. Daniel knew his ship could not win a fight against 3 warships. He had only one choice. He ordered Richard to prepare for an emergency jump, even though they were too close to the station. It was dangerous, possibly fatal, but staying meant certain death. The Verath fired again. The shot hit the Horizon's rear shields and nearly knocked out the power. Alarms rang throughout the ship. Sophie returned fire with their light defensive weapons, not because it would do any damage, but because she needed to do something. The horizon shook as another blast hit them. Richard screamed that the jump drive was ready. Daniel gave the order, and reality twisted around them as the ship tore a hole in space and vanished. They emerged 3 light years away, near an uninhabited system. The horizon was badly damaged, with fires on multiple decks and life support failing in several sections. But they were alive. 300 people had survived out of the original fleet of thousands. Daniel sat in his chair, unable to speak, unable to think. Sophie pulled up the recording of the attack and played it back. Before the Verith fired, they had broadcast a message on all frequencies. The message claimed that humans were dangerous invaders, that Earth's history of warfare made them a threat to galactic peace. The attack was meant to teach humanity their place in the galactic order. The message reached Earth 5 days later. The global response was immediate and unified in a way that had never happened before. Every nation, every government, every military force came together with a single purpose. The Galactic Council sent their own message shortly after, offering humanity a choice. Accept a subordinate position in the galactic hierarchy, with no voting rights and no territorial claims, or face further consequences. They expected humanity to bow down. They expected fear and submission. What the galaxy failed to understand was that humanity's history of warfare was not a weakness. It was a warning, and they had just awakened something that had been sleeping since humans first reached for the stars. Captain Daniel Cooper sent his report to Earth Command and waited for orders. He knew what was coming. The galaxy thought they had won. They had no idea what humanity was capable of when someone killed their children. 6 months passed with no response from humanity. The Galactic Council watched and waited, interpreting the silence as acceptance of their terms. In their council chambers, representatives from 12 species discussed the human situation with satisfaction. The Verith High Chancellor Zareth addressed the assembly, his yellow eyes gleaming with pride. He spoke of how easily the humans had been subdued, how their ships had scattered like frightened animals. The other species nodded in agreement. Some felt uncomfortable with the civilian deaths, but none spoke against the Verath. That was how the galaxy worked. The strong made the rules. The Verith began making plans to expand into human territory. They would take 3 systems near Earth and establish military bases there. The humans would be allowed to keep their homeworld, but they would serve the Verith, providing resources and labor. Zareth broadcasted these plans across the galaxy, wanting everyone to see how the mighty Verith dealt with upstart species. He received no response from Earth. The silence continued, but behind that silence something was happening, something the galaxy had never seen before. President Helen Carter stood before the United Earth government in a secure underground facility. Every nation had sent their leaders. There were no arguments, no political debates, no territorial disputes. The attack on the colony ships had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It had unified humanity completely. Helen spoke in a calm voice, but her words carried the weight of 7 billion angry people behind them. She authorized Operation Silent Thunder and gave the military unlimited resources to make it happen. Admiral Jack Morrison took command of the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet. He was a veteran of 3 small wars and had spent 20 years studying military strategy from every human conflict in history. Now he had to adapt all of that knowledge to space warfare. The admiral moved to a command center built into the dark side of Earth's moon. From there, he coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. Every shipyard on Earth and Mars worked 24 hours a day. Thousands of civilian ships were retrofitted with weapons and armor. New vessels were designed and built in months instead of years. Dr. Lisa Andrews led the Advanced Weapons Division from a laboratory complex in Antarctica. She was a physicist who had spent her career developing theoretical weapons that no one thought would ever be needed. Now her theories became reality with frightening speed. Her team created the quantum disruption torpedo, a weapon that could punch through energy shields by phasing in and out of normal space. The aliens relied on their shields. They had never faced weapons that could ignore them. Lisa tested the first torpedo on an asteroid, and it vanished the rock from existence. She authorized full production immediately. Engineer Paul Stevens worked in orbit around Saturn, developing a coating that made ships nearly invisible to standard detection systems. He borrowed technology from Earth's stealth aircraft and combined it with new materials created in zero gravity. The coating absorbed sensor waves instead of reflecting them. A ship covered in this material could fly within a few thousand kilometers of an enemy vessel and never be detected. Paul tested it on a small frigate, and every sensor on the moon base failed to see it. He smiled and ordered the coding applied to every strike ship in the fleet. Commander Kyle Martinez trained the first wave of fighter pilots in tactics that would make the aliens confused and terrified. He took pilots from every nation, the best of the best, and taught them how to fight in space. They learned to use gravity assists from planets and moons, slingshotting around massive objects at speeds that would crush most alien pilots. They practiced flying in formations that seemed chaotic but were mathematically perfect. They learned when to break off and when to ram enemy ships if that was what the mission required. Kyle was building an air force that fought like nothing the galaxy had ever encountered. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez led the Special Operations Training Program at a facility in the Australian outback. Her teams learned how to board enemy ships, how to sabotage critical systems, how to move through alien environments in hostile conditions. They studied every piece of intelligence about Vareth ship designs and found the weak points. Amy had fought in ground wars before joining the space program. She knew that sometimes you had to get close to your enemy and look them in the eye. Her teams would be ready for that. Captain Daniel Cooper spent those 6 months being debriefed by Intelligence Officer Nathan Pierce. They went over every second of the attack at Epsilon 9 hundreds of times. Nathan analyzed Vareth military patterns from historical records traded by other alien species. He discovered something interesting. The Varath had not fought a major war in 200 years. They were powerful, yes, but their tactics were old and predictable. They relied on their superior shields and firepower, expecting enemies to fight in traditional formations. Nathan realized that the Vareth had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice individual ships for strategic advantage. They had never fought humans. Agent Claire Bennett infiltrated the Galactic Council's information network by posing as a traitor from a minor species. She was one of 12 deep-cover operatives sent into alien space with false identities. Claire spent months building relationships, gathering information about fleet positions, supply routes, and political tensions. She discovered that not all species supported the Vareth actions. The Thalians, an aquatic race, had lost colonies to Varath aggression 50 years ago. They were forced to accept it and move on. Claire made contact with a Thalian diplomat who secretly provided detailed maps of Varath military installations. While the galaxy celebrated their domination of humanity, humans were doing what they did best. They were preparing for war with cold efficiency and burning anger. Every scientist, every engineer, every soldier worked with a single purpose. The civilians who died at Epsilon 9 would be avenged. The Vareth would learn that attacking human families was the worst mistake they ever made. The galaxy would learn that humanity's peaceful approach to space was a choice, not a weakness. Admiral Morrison reviewed the final preparations from his lunar command center. He had 150 warships ready, each one equipped with weapons the aliens had never seen. He had 300 stealth frigates that could strike anywhere without warning. He had 5,000 fighter pilots ready to fly missions that would terrify enemy commanders. He had special operations teams ready to board and capture enemy vessels. And he had something else, something the aliens could never match. He had millions of angry humans who wanted justice for their dead children. President Helen Carter received the final report. Operation Silent Thunder was ready to begin. She looked at the photos of the colony ship families one more time. Then she signed the authorization order and sent it to Admiral Morrison. The message was simple. Make them pay. Make sure they never forget what happens when you attack humanity. The Admiral received the order and allowed himself a cold smile. The 6 months of silence were about to end, and the galaxy was going to learn a very painful lesson. Admiral Jack Morrison stood in the command center on the dark side of Earth's moon and gave the order that would change galactic history. Operation Silent Thunder began at exactly midnight Earth Standard Time. 20 stealth frigates, invisible to every sensor in the Varath arsenal, jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished from the solar system. Each ship had a specific target. Each captain knew exactly what they had to do. There would be no warnings, no declarations of war, no mercy. The Varath had shown humanity what kind of galaxy this was. Now humanity would teach them what kind of species humans were. Captain Gregory Shaw commanded the stealth frigate Phantom as it emerged in the Vareth colony system of Carix Prime. His ship appeared less than 5,000 kilometers from a massive military shipyard, and not a single alarm went off. The Varath sensors looked right through the Phantom and saw nothing. Gregory watched the shipyard through his view screen, seeing hundreds of workers moving around building new warships. They had no idea death had arrived. Gregory armed the quantum disruption torpedoes and selected his targets with cold precision. He fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession. The torpedoes phased in and out of normal space as they flew toward the shipyard. The Vareth shields might as well have been made of paper. The first torpedo hit the main construction bay and erased it from existence. The second and third torpedoes struck the fuel storage tanks, and the resulting explosion lit up the entire system like a new sun. The fourth torpedo destroyed the command center. The fifth and sixth hit 2 nearly completed warships, reducing them to expanding clouds of debris. The entire attack took less than 3 minutes. Gregory ordered his ship to jump to the next target before any Vareth ships could respond. The same scene played out across 5 different Vareth colony systems. Commander Olivia Barnes hit a communications array that connected 15 systems, cutting off Vareth military coordination. Captain Andrew Foster destroyed a training facility where new Vareth pilots were learning to fly. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell targeted a weapons research station, making sure the scientists inside had time to evacuate before she blew it into atoms. Humanity was not interested in killing civilians. They wanted the Vareth military to hurt. Within 3 hours, the Vareth lost 40% of their military infrastructure in the outer colonies. Shipyards, communication networks, supply depots, and training facilities simply vanished under precise human strikes. The stealth frigates jumped away before reinforcements could arrive, leaving the Vareth confused and terrified. Their sensors never detected the attackers. Their shields never stopped the weapons. It was like fighting ghosts. High Chancellor Zareth received the reports in his command center on the Vareth homeworld. His yellow eyes widened in disbelief as he read about the attacks. This was impossible. The humans were weak. They had run away 6 months ago. How could they strike 5 systems simultaneously? How could they destroy military installations without being detected? Zareth's hands shook with rage as he realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had awakened something dangerous. The High Chancellor called an emergency meeting of the Vareth Military Council. He ordered the entire war fleet to mobilize all 300 vessels. They would go to Earth and crush the human homeworld, ending this rebellion before it could spread. Zareth broadcasted his intentions across the galaxy, calling humanity cowards for attacking military targets. He showed images of the destroyed shipyards and called it terrorism. He demanded the Galactic Council condemn the human actions and provide military support. Captain Daniel Cooper, still commanding the damaged horizon near Earth, heard Zareth's broadcast. He recorded his own message and sent it on all galactic frequencies. The message showed footage from Epsilon 9, the moment when Vareth warships destroyed 2 colony ships full of families. Daniel spoke in a quiet voice, asking the galaxy who the real terrorists were. He asked if military shipyards were more valuable than 5,000 civilian lives. His message spread through the council chambers and across hundreds of worlds. Some species began to question the Vareth version of events. The Vareth war fleet began moving toward Earth. It was an impressive sight. 300 warships of various sizes, all bristling with weapons and covered in powerful shields. Zareth commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Crimson Fang. He expected to reach Earth in 2 weeks and reduce the human defenses to rubble. He would make an example of humanity that would keep the other species in line for centuries. The Vareth had ruled through strength for 1,000 years. These upstart humans would learn their place. Admiral Morrison watched the Vareth fleet approach on his tactical displays. He pulled back all human ships to the solar system, making it look like humanity was preparing a desperate last stand at Earth. The Vareth saw this as confirmation of human weakness. They accelerated their approach, eager to finish this war quickly. Morrison allowed himself a thin smile. The Vareth were walking into a trap and they had no idea. The Vareth fleet entered the solar system and headed straight for Earth. But first, they had to pass through the outer planets. Jupiter loomed ahead, the massive gas giant with its deadly radiation belts and powerful gravity. The Vareth fleet adjusted course to swing around Jupiter, using the planet's gravity to increase their speed toward Earth. It was a standard maneuver, one they had done thousands of times before. They did not notice the small objects floating in Jupiter's orbit. They did not detect the fighter wings hiding in the shadow of Jupiter's moons. Commander Kyle Martinez led the fighter attack from his cockpit. He had 200 fighters under his command, pilots from 30 different nations all working together. They burst from behind Jupiter's moons and hit the Vareth fleet from 3 different angles. The Vareth were so surprised that their first shots went wild. Kyle's fighters flew patterns that seemed insane, using gravity assist to accelerate to speeds the Vareth could not match. They targeted the command ships, the vessels that coordinated the fleet movements. While the fighters kept the Vareth confused, Commander Richard Hayes activated the gravitational trap he had spent weeks preparing. He had placed gravity generators around Jupiter's orbit, devices that could amplify the planet's natural pull. When he activated them, 17 Vareth cruisers suddenly found themselves pulled toward Jupiter with irresistible force. Their engines screamed as they tried to escape, but they could not overcome the artificial gravity well. The ships were crushed by forces that bent metal and shattered shields. They fell into Jupiter's atmosphere and were torn apart by the planet's storms. The battle of Jupiter's orbit lasted 6 hours. The human fighters targeted engines and command centers, crippling ships instead of destroying them when possible. Lieutenant Sophie Grant, now commanding the destroyer Valiant, led a squadron of larger ships that hit the Vareth fleet from behind. The Vareth tried to form defensive positions, but human tactics kept them off balance. Every time they thought they understood the human attack pattern, it changed. When the battle ended, the Vareth had lost 80 ships. Some were destroyed completely. Others were crippled and drifting. The surviving Vareth vessels retreated in disorder, something their proud warrior culture had not experienced in 500 years. High Chancellor Zareth sat in his command chair on the Crimson Fang, unable to process what had happened. His superior fleet had been defeated by an inferior force. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. Admiral Morrison did not pursue the retreating Vareth. He had made his point. Earth could defend itself, and it could hurt anyone who attacked. The galaxy watched the battle footage, and suddenly humanity did not look weak anymore. The Vareth had learned a painful lesson, but the war was far from over. The Galactic Council met an emergency session 3 days after the Battle of Jupiter. The massive chamber filled with representatives from 12 different species, each one speaking in their own language through translation devices. High Chancellor Zareth stood before them, his green scales darker than usual, a sign of Vareth anger and shame. He demanded that the Council declare humanity a rogue threat and mobilize combined military forces against Earth. His voice echoed through the chamber as he described how human weapons had destroyed Vareth ships and violated the established rules of galactic warfare. But the chamber was not as unified as Zareth expected. 3 species abstained from the vote, refusing to support military action against humanity. The Thalians, the aquatic species that had secretly helped humans, openly questioned whether the Vareth had provoked the conflict. Their representative, a female named Thessia, played the footage of the Epsilon 9 attack for the entire council. She asked how destroying civilian colony ships was considered acceptable, while destroying military shipyards was called terrorism. Several other species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Agent Claire Bennett watched the council proceedings from the gallery, still maintaining her cover as a minor species trader. She recorded everything and sent encrypted reports back to Earth. The council was fracturing, and that was good for humanity. Not every species loved the Vareth. Many feared them. The battle at Jupiter had shown that the Vareth could be defeated, and that knowledge was spreading through the galaxy like fire. Claire made contact with 3 more species who privately expressed support for humanity's right to defend itself. President Helen Carter addressed the galaxy from the White House. Her message was broadcast on every available frequency, reaching billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. She spoke calmly but firmly, explaining that humanity had sought only peace and friendship when they entered galactic space. They had been attacked without warning, without provocation, and had lost 5,000 innocent lives. She stated that humanity would defend itself with every weapon at their disposal, and would respond with overwhelming force against any who threatened Earth or human colonies. Then she made an offer that shocked the galaxy. She gave the Vareth one chance to end the conflict, surrender their military leadership for trial, pay reparations to the families of the dead, and accept galactic oversight of their military. The offer would stand for 72 hours. High Chancellor Zareth rejected the offer within 3 hours. He called it an insult to Vareth honor and vowed to fight until every human world was under Vareth control. His response was broadcast across the galaxy with the same pride and arrogance he had always shown. But those who knew the Vareth well could see the fear in his yellow eyes. He had lost 80 ships and hundreds of warriors. His fleet was damaged and demoralized, yet he could not accept peace because that would mean admitting weakness, and the Vareth would rather die than appear weak. President Carter received Zareth's response and nodded slowly. She had expected this. The Vareth were warriors who understood only strength. She gave Admiral Morrison authorization to escalate operations. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity could really do when pushed to the edge. The Admiral contacted Dr. Lisa Andrews at her laboratory in Antarctica. He told her to prepare the Stellar Lance for deployment. Lisa had hoped they would never need to use this weapon, but she had known in her heart that they would. The Stellar Lance was not a ship or a missile. It was a system of satellites that could be positioned around any star. Once activated, the satellites created resonance waves that triggered massive solar flares. The flares could then be directed using magnetic fields, turning a star into a weapon that could sterilize entire planets. It was terrifying technology, the kind that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Dr. Lisa Andrews had built it because she knew that sometimes peace required the threat of overwhelming force. Admiral Morrison selected a target carefully. He chose an uninhabited Vareth mining system called Teryx, far from any colonies but still valuable to the Vareth economy. He sent a message to the Galactic Council 48 hours in advance, telling them exactly what was going to happen and giving them time to evacuate any ships in the area. Then he ordered 12 satellites deployed around the Teryx star. The galaxy watched and waited, not quite believing that humans would actually do this. When the countdown reached 0, Dr. Lisa Andrews activated the Stellar Lance from her laboratory. The satellites around the Teryx star began generating resonance waves that penetrated deep into the star's core. Within an hour, massive solar flares erupted from the star's surface. The magnetic fields guided the flares toward the mining facilities on 3 different planets. The facilities, the equipment, the automated mining drones, everything was vaporized by stellar fire. The demonstration was broadcast across the galaxy so everyone could see. Humanity had turned a star into a weapon, and they had done it with precision and control. The Galactic Council fell silent. No species had ever demonstrated this level of power before. The ability to weaponize stars changed everything. High Chancellor Zareth watched the footage from his flagship and felt something he had never experienced before. True fear. If humans could do this to one system, they could do it to any system, including the Vareth homeworld. The balance of power had shifted in a single demonstration, but Zareth was desperate now, backed into a corner by his own pride. He made the worst decision of the entire war. He authorized the use of biological weapons against human colony worlds. The Vareth had developed these weapons centuries ago, but had never used them because they violated every galactic treaty. Zareth did not care anymore. If he was going to fall, he would take humanity with him. 3 Vareth ships carried biological weapons to 3 small human colonies and released them into the atmosphere. The weapons worked quickly. They were designed to target human biology specifically, attacking the respiratory system and nervous system simultaneously. 15,000 colonists died within days before the colonies could be evacuated. Children, families, scientists, all killed by an invisible enemy they could not fight. The news reached Earth and spread through the human population like a shockwave. The anger that had been burning since Epsilon 9 turned into something darker and more dangerous. Commander Nathan Pierce, the intelligence officer, traced the biological weapons to their source. He found the laboratory where they were developed, located on the Varath homeworld in an underground facility. He also identified where High Chancellor Zareth and his Council of Generals were commanding the war from, a fortified bunker beneath the capital city. Nathan brought this information to Admiral Morrison and waited for the order he knew was coming. Admiral Morrison called a meeting with his senior officers: Captain Daniel Cooper, Lieutenant Sophie Grant, Commander Richard Hayes, Commander Kyle Martinez, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, and a dozen others gathered in the Lunar Command Center. The Admiral laid out the situation clearly. The Vareth had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They had used biological weapons on civilians, violating every rule of warfare. Humanity had to respond, not with another demonstration, but with decisive action that would end the war permanently. He proposed the most dangerous operation of the entire conflict: a strike directly at the Varath homeworld to capture their leadership and destroy the biological weapons facility. Captain Gregory Shaw volunteered to lead the strike force. He would take 20 ships, half of them stealth frigates and half of them carrying special operations teams. The mission was to reach the Verath homeworld, disable the planetary defense station, and extract High Chancellor Zareth and his generals alive. It was nearly impossible, suicidal even, but someone had to do it. Amy Rodriguez and her special operations teams would handle the boarding and extraction. Kyle Martinez would provide fighter cover. Sophie Grant would command the tactical coordination from her ship. The mission launched 72 hours after the biological attacks. 20 human ships jumped into Verath home system and immediately faced resistance from orbital defense platforms. But the stealth frigates had the element of surprise, and the quantum disruption torpedoes tore through the platforms before they could properly organize a defense. Amy Rodriguez and her teams boarded the main defense station using breaching pods, small armored capsules that attached to the hull and cut through. They fought through Verath soldiers deck by deck, using tactics and weapons the warriors had never encountered. Within 4 hours, the defense station was under human control. With the orbital defenses down, Captain Gregory Shaw took his ships into the atmosphere and located Zareth's bunker. The bunker was deep underground, protected by meters of armor and energy shields. But humanity had studied Verath engineering for months, and Nathan Pierce had found the weakness. The ventilation system. Amy's teams rappelled down the ventilation shafts and placed breaching charges at critical points. The charges went off simultaneously, and the teams poured into the bunker from 6 different entry points. High Chancellor Zareth and his generals never had a chance to mount a real defense. They were politicians and administrators who had sent others to die, but never fought themselves. Amy's team secured them in. The war ended after 11 months of conflict, but the changes it brought would last for centuries. The Galactic Council reconvened in a different chamber now, one where humanity sat at the table as an equal member rather than a subordinate petitioner. President Helen Carter led the human delegation personally, flanked by Admiral Jack Morrison and Captain Daniel Cooper. The other species representatives watched them with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had defeated the Verath in open warfare and captured their leadership without destroying their homeworld. The Treaty of Saul took 3 months to negotiate. President Carter presented humanity's terms with quiet firmness. Any future attack on civilian populations by any species would result in immediate military response from a coalition of willing members, with humanity leading the enforcement. The Galactic Council would establish clear rules of warfare that protected non-combatants and limited the use of weapons of mass destruction. Every member species would contribute to a peacekeeping force that could respond to threats quickly. And humanity would have permanent membership on the Council with full voting rights and the ability to veto military actions they deemed unjust. Some species objected loudly. The Krill, an insectoid race that had benefited from Verath protection, argued that humanity was too new to space to have such power. President Carter listened politely, and then played footage of the Epsilon 9 attack one more time. She reminded the Council that humanity had not asked for this war, had not wanted this power, but would not hesitate to use it if threatened again. The Krill representative went silent. The Thalians openly supported the human proposals, as did 4 other species who had lived under Verath intimidation for decades. The treaty passed with only 2 dissenting votes. The galaxy had a new order now, one where strength was balanced by accountability and where civilian lives were protected by law rather than by the mercy of whoever held the biggest fleet. It was not perfect and everyone knew it. But it was better than what came before, and that was enough for now. High Chancellor Zareth and his Council of Generals faced trial in a neutral court, composed of judges from 7 different species, including 2 humans. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, and billions watched as evidence was presented. Footage from Epsilon 9 showed the unprovoked attack on civilian ships. Testimony from survivors described the terror and loss. Records proved that Zareth had authorized the biological weapons attack, knowing it would kill civilians. The Verath leaders tried to claim they were defending galactic order from a dangerous species, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Captain Daniel Cooper testified at the trial. He spoke about his daughter, who had been on the 2nd colony ship. He described her dreams of exploring alien worlds and making friends with beings from other planets. He talked about the moment he watched her die in an explosion of light, because someone decided humans did not deserve to exist peacefully in space. His testimony lasted 20 minutes, and there was not a sound in the courtroom when he finished. Even some of the Vareth in the gallery wept, understanding for the first time the true cost of their leadership's actions. The verdict came after 2 weeks of deliberation. Zareth and his generals were found guilty of crimes against sentient beings, war crimes, and genocide. The sentence was life imprisonment in a maximum security facility on a neutral world, with no possibility of parole or early release. The Varath species as a whole was placed under galactic oversight. They would not be allowed to maintain offensive military capabilities for 50 years. Their shipyards would be monitored, and their fleet would be limited to defensive vessels only. It was a harsh sentence, but one designed to prevent future aggression while giving the Varath people a chance to rebuild their society without the warrior culture that had defined them for centuries. Admiral Jack Morrison retired 6 months after the war ended. He was 53 years old and tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He had done what was necessary, had led humanity through its first galactic war, and had won. But victory had cost him something he could not name. At his retirement ceremony, President Carter awarded him the Medal of Valor and thanked him for saving humanity. Morrison accepted the medal and gave a short speech where he reminded everyone that war should always be the last option, never the first. Then he went home to his family and tried to remember what peace felt like. Before he left, Morrison established the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. It was a multinational fleet that included ships and personnel from 7 species, with humans making up 40% of the force. The fleet's mission was to respond to conflicts before they became wars, to protect civilian populations, and to enforce the Treaty of Sol. Commander Kyle Martinez became one of the first instructors at the Joint Military Academy on a neutral world, teaching pilots from different species how to work together. The academy became a symbol of the new galactic order, a place where former enemies learned to trust each other. Dr. Lisa Andrews shut down the Weapons Research Division and transferred her team to peaceful applications. The quantum disruption technology that had defeated Varath shields became the basis for faster-than-light communication systems that connected the entire galaxy. Messages that once took weeks to cross space now arrived in hours. The stealth coding that engineer Paul Stevens developed was adapted for scientific exploration vessels, allowing them to study dangerous regions of space without being detected by hostile forces. Lisa received the Galactic Science Prize for her contributions to communication technology, though she never mentioned that the same technology had destroyed hundreds of ships. Agent Claire Bennett left her cover identity and returned to Earth as a hero of human intelligence. She was offered a position as ambassador to the Thalian homeworld and accepted. The Thalians had become humanity's strongest allies, appreciating that humans had used their military might with precision rather than engaging in wholesale destruction. Claire spent the next 5 years building diplomatic relationships and ensuring that the alliance remained strong. She married a Thalian scientist, and their union became a symbol of how different species could find common ground. Captain Daniel Cooper returned to space exploration, but everything was different now. He commanded a new ship, the Discovery, with a crew twice the size of the old Horizon. Lieutenant Sophie Grant served as his second officer, and together they led diplomatic missions to species who had never met humans before. They were not just exploring anymore. They were ambassadors for a species that had proven it could defend itself, but preferred peace. Daniel carried a picture of his daughter in his pocket every day. He made sure that every alien species he met knew her name and her story. She had wanted to make friends among the stars, and he was doing that work for her. The Varath people struggled with their new reality. For centuries, they had defined themselves by their military strength and their dominance over other species. Now they were defeated and restricted, forced to find a new identity. Many Varath rejected their old leadership and began building a different kind of society. They focused on trade and technology instead of conquest. A young Varath named Selrix became a vocal advocate for peace and reconciliation. She traveled to Earth and met with survivors of the attacks, asking for forgiveness on behalf of her people. Not everyone could forgive, and Selrix understood that. But she kept trying, believing that her species could be better than their past. 1 year after the war ended, a new species made contact with the Galactic Council. They called themselves the Mordath, and they came from a region of space that had been unexplored. The Mordath were aggressive and confident, their first messages full of demands and threats. They looked at the Council and saw weakness, a collection of species afraid to fight. They announced they would be taking 3 systems near Council space and expected no resistance. Before the Council could respond, a Thalian diplomat played a video for the Mordath representatives. It showed footage from the Battle of Jupiter, human fighters swarming Vareth ships with devastating effectiveness. It showed the Stellar Lance demonstration, a star turned into a weapon. It showed the capture of High Chancellor Zareth, human soldiers walking through the heart of the Vareth homeworld and taking their leadership captive. The diplomat explained that humanity was a member of the Council now, and any attack on Council space would be met with human military response. The Mordath representatives watched the footage in silence. Their aggressive posture faded. They asked questions about human capabilities, about how many ships humanity had, about what other weapons they possessed. The Council answered honestly. Humanity had a fleet of 500 warships now, with more being built. They had weapons that could bypass shields, fighters that flew like nothing else in the galaxy, and the ability to turn stars into weapons. The Mordath reconsidered their approach immediately. Within a week, they entered negotiations for peaceful trade and diplomatic relations. President Helen Carter gave a speech at the memorial for the 5,000 civilians lost at Epsilon 9. The memorial was built on Earth, a beautiful garden with a monument listing every name. She spoke to a crowd of thousands, including families who had lost loved ones. 5 years had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. Humanity had become a central power in galactic politics, not through conquest but through their demonstrated ability to defend themselves and their allies. The Treaty of Sol had held, and the Galactic Peacekeeping Force had successfully prevented 3 conflicts from escalating into wars. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was more stable than it had been in centuries. Captain Daniel Cooper sat in his ready room aboard the Discovery, reviewing reports from their latest mission. They had just returned from first contact with a species called the Ventari, a peaceful race of beings who communicated through light patterns instead of sound. The meeting had gone well, and the Ventari were interested in joining the Galactic Council. Daniel felt satisfied with the work they were doing. This was what he had originally hoped for when humanity first reached for the stars: peace, exploration, and friendship among different species. Lieutenant Sophie Grant entered the ready room with a concerned expression. She carried a data pad with new intelligence from Agent Claire Bennett, now serving as ambassador to the Thalian homeworld. The report detailed troubling activity in the Krill systems. The Krill, the insectoid species that had objected to humanity's place on the Council, were building military installations near the border of human space. The installations were technically legal under the Treaty of Sol, but their placement and design suggested offensive capabilities rather than defensive ones. Daniel read the report carefully and felt the old tension returning to his shoulders. He had hoped that the lesson learned from the Varath would prevent future conflicts, but apparently, some species needed to learn for themselves. The Krill had always resented human power, and they had spent the past 5 years building alliances with 3 smaller species who shared their resentment. Now it seemed they were preparing to test humanity's willingness to enforce the treaty. Admiral Jack Morrison came out of retirement for the emergency council meeting. He was older now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had won the war against the Vareth. He sat across from President Helen Carter in the Situation Room, deep beneath the White House. Around them, military advisors and diplomats discussed options for responding to the Krill buildup. Some argued for immediate military strikes to destroy the installations. Others suggested diplomatic pressure and economic sanctions. Morrison listened to the arguments and then spoke in his quiet, measured voice. He reminded everyone that humanity had built its reputation on precision and restraint, not on aggression. The Krill had not attacked anyone yet. They were building defenses in their own space. If humanity struck first, they would become the aggressors, and the moral authority they had gained from the Vareth conflict would vanish. Instead, Morrison proposed a different approach. Show the Krill exactly what they would face if they chose war, and let them make an informed decision. President Carter agreed with Morrison's assessment. She authorized a military exercise near the Krill border, a demonstration of human capabilities that would leave no doubt about the outcome of any conflict. Admiral Morrison came out of retirement temporarily to oversee the exercise. He contacted Commander Kyle Martinez at the military academy and requested his fighter wings. He called Captain Gregory Shaw and his stealth frigates. He assembled a force that was smaller than what humanity had used against the Vareth, but still impressive enough. To make the point clear, the exercise took place in an empty system 3 light years from the Krill border. The Galactic Council was invited to send observers, and 12 species sent ships to watch. The Krill sent 3 observers, and their transmissions were broadcast back to their homeworld. What they saw was a carefully choreographed demonstration of human military power. Stealth frigates appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Fighters performed maneuvers that seemed impossible. A demonstration of the Stellar Lance satellite system was prepared but not activated. The satellites positioned around a star to show they could be deployed but did not need to be used. The exercise lasted 6 hours and showcased every major weapon system humanity had developed. The observers saw quantum disruption torpedoes destroy target asteroids from beyond detection range. They watched human soldiers board and capture a mock enemy station in 12 minutes. They saw coordinated fleet actions that combined different ship types into devastating combinations. And at the end, Admiral Morrison broadcast a simple message to all observers. This was what humanity could do when they chose to show restraint. Anyone who forced humanity to fight for real would face something far worse. The Krill observers returned home with their recordings, and the footage was shown to the Krill High Council. The council members watched in silence, their compound eyes reflecting the images of human ships destroying targets with clinical precision. After the footage ended, the council called for an emergency vote. Within 24 hours, they announced a change in policy. The military installations near human space would be converted to trade stations and scientific research facilities. The Krill did not want a war with humanity. They had seen what happened to the Vareth, and they had no desire to become the next example. Dr. Lisa Andrews received the news with relief. She had been dreading the possibility of another war, another situation where her weapons would be needed. She was older now, in her 60s, and spent most of her time teaching at the university in Geneva. Her students came from 7 different species, learning physics and engineering together. Lisa loved teaching because it represented what the galaxy could be when different species worked together toward common goals. She had built terrible weapons during the war, and she would live with that burden for the rest of her life. But now she was building bridges between species, and that work gave her peace. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez had become Colonel Amy Rodriguez, commanding the Special Operations Division of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. Her teams included humans, Thalians, and members of 3 other species. They trained together, learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, and built trust through shared challenges. Amy took pride in the fact that her force had never needed to engage in actual combat. Their reputation was enough to make potential aggressors reconsider their actions. She believed that the best soldiers were those who prevented wars rather than fought them. Engineer Paul Stevens had retired from military work and started a private company that designed civilian spacecraft. His ships were fast, efficient, and beautiful. They incorporated human design aesthetics with alien technology, creating vessels that were popular throughout the galaxy. Paul had gotten rich from his work, but he donated most of his money to schools and medical facilities in developing systems. He believed that a stable galaxy needed economic opportunity for everyone, not just the powerful species. Agent Claire Bennett and her Thalian husband, Korath, welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Marina. The birth was historic, the first human-Thalian hybrid child. Marina could breathe both air and water, a beautiful combination of both species' traits. Medical experts from across the galaxy studied Marina's development, not as an experiment but as a symbol of what was possible when species came together in peace. Claire looked at her daughter and felt hope for the future, in a way she had not felt since before the war. Captain Daniel Cooper received a transmission from Earth while the Discovery was exploring a nebula at the edge of charted space. The transmission informed him that he had been selected to become the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council's central government. It was a prestigious position, one that would require him to leave exploration behind and focus on diplomacy. Daniel stood in his ready room for a long time, thinking about the choice before him. He had spent his entire career exploring space, discovering new worlds, meeting new species. But perhaps it was time for a new kind of exploration, one that involved building relationships and preventing conflicts. He accepted the position. Lieutenant Sophie Grant was promoted to captain and given command of the Discovery. She was nervous about the responsibility, but Daniel assured her she was ready. She had been with him through the worst moments of the HFY War and had proven herself capable under impossible pressure. The Discovery would be in good hands. Daniel packed his belongings and prepared to return to Earth for his new assignment. Before he left, Sophie asked him what advice he would give her as a new captain. Daniel thought for a moment and then told her to remember that the uniform they wore represented more than just military power. It represented humanity's promise to seek peace but defend the innocent. President Helen Carter finished her second term and chose not to run for a third. She had led humanity through its most challenging period, from the trauma of the Epsilon 9 attack to the establishment of a new galactic order. Now it was time for someone else to carry that burden. At her final speech as president, she talked about the journey humanity had taken over the past decade. They had gone from being naive newcomers to becoming one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. But power, she reminded everyone, was not the goal. Peace was the goal. Power was just the tool that made peace possible. The Varath people had slowly rebuilt their